All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 131 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I've got my normal co-host from a suburb in Moscow, Ian Kummer. Thank you, Ian, for joining me. I've got two special guests, Leo Zhao from Berlin, East Berlin, formerly East Berlin in Germany. And I have Patrick Corbett from Vancouver, Canada, and it's snowing there. He's snowed in, so thankfully he's able to join us. So thank you guys, all three of you, for joining me. I wanted to talk today about a very broad topic, but it has relevance. And first off, I want to just plug Brian Berletic, and in the description of this video, I've linked to a video he did a couple days ago, just talking about this topic in depth. But kind of what I want to start out with is talking about, the Marxist worldview, understanding that what the West, the ideology that the West is immersed in, liberalism, kind of is intended to confuse people and not allow them to understand reality. So reality is that capitalist society is divided along class lines. And the class struggle is the struggle for the two classes, the ownership class and the working class, to control the government, to control policies. So in the United States, the government is owned by the capitalist class. It's an oligarchy. The entirety of the West is an oligarchy. And so you have oligarchic interests are the interests that are deciding policy and that are it's the interests of the oligarchs that are being pursued. And so what are the interests of the oligarchy right now? And so if we think of, when we hear the news, when we hear our politicians talking about our national security interests, what are our national security interests? Because they use these words, and then people, the workers like us, think, well, shoot, I mean, it's our country, like we care about securing our country, but people ought to realize that they're not talking about the interests, the security interests of the working class. They're talking about the security interests of the oligarchs, of the owners of the industries and Western corporations. And so really our entire foreign policy is predicated not on securing the securing the security interests of the working class, but on securing the security interests of the big corporations, making sure that their profits keep rolling in, making sure that they are dominant, that they have access to markets, that they have access to resources. So that's the security interests of the United States that the government talks about. So given that reality, when we talk about China, and China's growing economy and China displacing Western corporations, we see that the United States is preparing to deal with that. And they're preparing to, at the behest of the oligarchs, of the owners of the industries, they're preparing to, I would argue, implement another trade embargo against China. And I think that a lot of the things that we see Trump doing today are illustrative and are examples of, preparing the battlefield for a future confrontation with China where we try and militarily enforce an embargo. And so what's going on in Panama, I think, is an obvious example. Trump goes down to Panama, tells the leader, you need to kick China out and give us the canal. And the leader says, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll kick China out. We'll end our engagement in the Belt and Road. We'll keep the canal. We don't want to give you the canal, but we will kick China out. We'll just side with you 100%. So I think that's just what happened like the last 2 days, right? I think that's essentially what happened. But what else can I say before I hand it over to the chaos of you guys' response?
Well, I think you're making a very tough sell.
Okay,
I'm going to
not selling you.
identify it myself as a skeptic, and I've always been a skeptic of the war with China arguments we've had here. So maybe I don't want to cut you off. So maybe tie that in, because I see economic war, I see a trade war, I see economically muscling with China, but that to me that doesn't translate into a war. So maybe if you could try to tie that in, why would that mean anybody in the USA wants to war with China?
Well, I'm not sure it's about a war, right? It's about implementing a trade embargo. It's about destroying China economically, weakening China, containing China, and reducing China's ability to continue to displace the West around the planet. And to do that, you got to cut China off from energy. You've got to cut China's ability to export and import goods, because ultimately that's the Chinese economy. They manufacture things and they export them all over the world. And so you have to significantly interfere with their ability to do that in order to weaken and contain them. Now,
in order to do that,
say that again.
In order to do that, I think each and every option is on the table. each and every tool, if decided upon that it's useful, will be used, including military confrontation, of course, to maintain the hegemony and the exorbitant privileges of the owners of the corporations, Western corporations. So yeah, I wouldn't take military engagement off of the list of possibilities.
And I want to assert that what the West is doing is really obvious, right? It is very obvious what they're doing, and China, it's obvious to China too. These are assertions I'm making. Anybody can look at what the United States is doing and understand that they are preparing. They are putting the pieces in place to choke off the most important arteries, economic arteries to China. Anybody can look at a map and see that that's true. Now, I would argue that what Leo said, it reminds me that it could be that, this will be used as leverage, right? This will be used as leverage in order to get China to comply with a trade deal that's really beneficial for the United States and not so beneficial for China. So it could be just used as leverage, but like Leo was saying, nothing is off the table, and it's hard to imagine that they would go to so much effort, years and years of working and preparing the battlefield to do exactly this and then not pull the trigger. For the idea that they would end up not pulling the trigger it's like, the buildup to Desert Storm, right? You're going to move hundreds of thousands of troops into the Middle East, all these tanks, and then you're not going to use them. The minute they started going, it's a fait accompli. That it doesn't matter if they have weapons of mass destruction well, I guess back then it was to remove Kuwait, right? It was to get the United States out of Kuwait. But, you knew it was going to happen. There was not going to be any solution. So to me, it just seems obvious. They're either going to leverage this ability, because they're going to, right now they're putting the capacity to do it in place. And either they're going to leverage that ability to strong arm China into an agreement that they otherwise wouldn't make, or they're going to use it. But I think that both options are possible.
Yeah, many methods are being implemented, being used, or being prepared, right, on many different fronts. There's the trade stuff, but then throughout, consistent in the last 10, 15, 20 years has been the heavy increasing militarization of the South China Sea, of the surrounding countries, of the First Island chain, of building alliances, building the Quad, building these hostile military alliances, has been increasing, has been accelerating in the last few years, of militarization of Taiwan, of Philippines, and all of these places. And one could argue that last year, towards the end of 2024, there was already an attempt to actually start a hot war. One can view the military dictatorship, the martial law declared in South Korea, as a failed attempt to spark a war between South and North Korea in order to have it spill over into China, as sparking a regional war in East Asia. So, of course, the ultimate goal being to take down China. So yeah, that failed. There was provocations. Yoon, at the behest of Washington, for sure, did many provocations of the North, and the North did not respond. If the North had responded, the martial law would have worked a lot better, and it would have stuck possibly. And so yeah.
Yeah, I remember there was allegations that there was, the special military forces of South Korea were going to dress up as North Koreans, and they were going to kidnap or kill some parliamentarians. And that was this plot that was exposed, that Yoon was trying to do. And of course, the U.S. distances themselves. They say, no, that was just all on him. That was his harebrained idea. But it's hard to know for sure. But you're absolutely right. Like, there's a large possibility. The thing is, if we're talking about timelines, 4 years is a long time, and this is going to happen in the next 4 years. They are not going to wait for another president in 2029 to do this. They don't have that kind of time. So if they're going to initiate, a serious effort to contain China using the military, it'll happen under Trump's leadership. It'll happen under his presidency. There's no doubt about it. 2027 probably is a good guess. Everybody's throwing that year out, and they've been throwing that year out for a while. But
I don't know. Feel like we're going to be having this conversation in 4 years, and there's going to be no war with China, and
hopefully
the next president. I just don't see a basis for it. It's true. Because what we're seeing, because I do think it's true that Trump does not want BRICS or China in the New World, if you will, in North and South America. I think that's true. And that's something that I've commented on, actually, not just me. A lot of people have commented on how the Biden crew was trying to hold on to everything, and it was just sand slipping through their fingers. They're just China and Russia were just doing stuff in their backyard, and there wasn't really much they could do about it because they were so strung out all over the world. So I think what's likely here is that we're going back to, that Monroe Doctrine time where, the footprint that, the unipolar, even Rubio's comments that, the unipolar world order is over, to me signals that the United States is accepting a smaller footprint.
Is the United States increasing or decreasing its footprint in the Philippines or in Taiwan?
Well, it's a good question, because the webpage for the one for Taiwan has been scrubbed for the all it's left on it right now is the one China policy, that was in the news. So I think, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be less aggressive. he could rewrite it to be more aggressive. It just means it's changing. But my bet would be it's going to be less aggressive, because I think, I'm 95% sure of this. If there is a war or an escalation up to a war with China, a prerequisite for that is for the USA to move away from the one China policy. It's kind of schizophrenic the way it is now, where we're diplomatically recognizing, Taiwan is part of one China, but on the same breath, treating it like an independent country and sending them weapons, all this crap. But I don't think China is going to do anything I mean, they're not going. I think China. I think it's a pretty safe bet. China's not going to initiate the hostilities as long as the USA at least pays lip service to that sovereignty, to that one China. So I don't see that changing.
It's definitely a hot spot that could, be a catalyst for, engaging in a bigger conflict, and the reason why we implement a trade embargo against China. So, for instance, if China were to embargo Taiwan, which they would do immediately if Taiwan declared independence, or if Taiwan crossed some other red lines, China would do a embargo of Taiwan. China would embargo Taiwan, and that could be the justification for the U.S. saying, "Hey, okay, well, we have to embargo China. If they're going to embargo Taiwan, we're going to embargo China because that's an active war against Taiwan. The Taiwanese people need their freedom." So, but what I asked you was in the Philippines. I mean, our footprint is definitely getting bigger. Our footprint is growing in the Philippines. The weapons that we're sending to Taiwan is increasing, and so I think we need to understand when we talk about Fortress America. I think it is an understanding that we're not going to regime change Russia and we're not going to regime change China, but it doesn't mean that we're giving up on trying to weaken them, right? We're not going to give up on trying to do our best to undermine them, and so it really has a lot more to do with strengthening the United States, and strengthening the United States in a way that wasn't permissible under the previous establishment, right? Under the rules-based order, you couldn't just annex Canada, right? You couldn't just annex Greenland. You couldn't just annex the Panama Canal. That wouldn't have been kosher under the rules-based order. I mean, they still did a lot of unkosher stuff, but they couldn't do it so outright and obviously. And so with Trump, he's helping them because he's doing these things that couldn't be done before. So he's going to be capturing these resources, capturing these governments, capturing these very important geographical areas like Greenland, like the Panama Canal, and he's going to be doing it overtly. And that's in order to strengthen the United States in preparation for a real great power conflict that is not gonna, we're not eschewing great power conflict. We're still determined that we're going to weaken and destroy China. Well, not destroy, but significantly weaken, because we're not going to be able to co-opt them and control them.
Well, I mean, the problem with the Philippines example is that, that predates. It predates a lot of things. I mean, it goes back to the 19th century. I mean, that's been a place when from the very opening days of the USA being a world power at all. I mean, Philippines was one of the first places that the USA as a global power established a foothold in. So I think, and again, I mean, I feel like we're neglecting our guests to get best. Maybe they can chime in about this, but
sorry, guests.
To me, I think I think some people here are guilty of a preconceived conclusion and then cherry picking evidence to support that conclusion. Yeah, I think there's a tendency. I think maybe.
Well, I mean, it's not only great power rivalry here. There's not only international competition and rivalry here. There is a system to preserve. There's a system that is at risk, that is being threatened. There's a system of imperialism. There's a global structure of imperialism and capitalism, which needs to be preserved, which is in crisis, which is rapidly collapsing, not just declining, but collapsing. And if we look at history, we see what happens, what is made to happen when the system is in crisis, is in a state of collapse. Capitalism should have ended in the 1920s with the Great Depression. That was a collapse of capitalism. That was the internal contradictions of capitalism completely becoming untenable, completely becoming unworkable, and rapidly collapsing. It did collapse. and communism was very strong all over the world, all over the industrialized world, all over Europe, and in the USA as well. Eugene Debs and in the 1930s, and of course we saw what happened. The oligarchs, the capitalists and the capitalists above the capitalists, the mega ultra capitalists, the ultra elites, engineered a world war in order to preserve the system, in order to preserve this global structure of capital, of imperialism. Um, by funding the Nazis, by funding the fascists in Spain, in Italy, because these were the countries where the communists were the strongest. So they made sure that fascism arose in Europe and led to a world war in order to defeat the communists at home and to try to destroy the Soviet Union abroad, the big threat, the big other. That was a challenge, that was presenting a challenge to the capitalist system. So I think what's happening now, I mean, we have a zombie of a zombie of a zombie version of capitalism.
Let's not jump. I want to jump in. That's some great analysis. But here's what happened in World War II. Thanks to the sacrifice of tens of millions of Chinese communists and Soviet communists, the United States found itself in a very unearned and very privileged position. So the United States didn't sacrifice in World War II. They didn't do any of the heavy lifting. But at the end of World War II, they found themselves accounting for half the global economy, almost all of the manufacturing, and only like 5% of the population. So following immediately at the end of World War II, they turned their eyes to the big enemy, to their power and their system, their oligarchic system, which was the Soviet Union. So we had the Cold War, all the way until 1989. And the advantage that the West had in the Cold War is, again, it's hard to overstate. But again, a tiny population accounting for so much of the global economy, they were able to make their currency the world's reserve currency, which is just a tremendous advantage, not to mention all of the, just control of the manufacturing, and the entire global economy was dominated by the United States. So they created this new world order. They created the global economy to benefit them. And so the Soviet Union, was struggling. And so we know that it got dismantled, right, in 1989 to 1991, due to an internal coup. It wasn't anything that was necessary or out of necessity.
And also, let me just add that it was dismantled. It was dismantled, only possible when it was severely weakened by the Nazis. The Nazis did their job for the oligarchs. For the most part, they performed the function, a big part of the function that they were funded to do, which was to weaken the Soviet Union. I mean, a generation of young men were lost, many cities destroyed. The Soviet Union would have been twice as strong during the Cold War, if not for the Nazis.
Right. And then internal, I think, it's likely Stalin was murdered. It's likely the clique that came after him, was responsible for the Sino-Soviet split, which of course further weakened the Soviet Union. And but the greedy capitalists, the greedy Western capitalists, once they saw the Sino-Soviet split, they were like, you know what? We can make a whole lot of money from Chinese labor, right? And so that was the impetus behind Kissinger and Nixon agreeing, like Mao had been asking them for decades, to end their unilaterally imposed embargo. But so this gets us to where we started, right? So there's this embargo that was established from the beginning of the Korean War in 52 or 51 or 53, all the way until 1971. And Mao the whole time was wanting to end the embargo because he knew how international trade could benefit China and help them to develop their productive forces. Well, that wasn't an option until the West ended their embargo, and so the U.S. made a lot of money. Western corporations were able to flood China and make a lot of money, but it also benefited China. The Communist Party of China was all for ending the embargo and accepting, Western investment because there was strings attached, right? There was strings attached to Western investment, which was technology transfers, and it was also access to Western markets. And so it was a win-win because that's what trade is. Trade is win-win. And China was, they were absolutely correct. So that gets us into another argument, right? Because there's some Western Marxists that say China's not communist, they're capitalist because, they started doing business with the West and they allow Western, privately owned companies into China. So we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but suffice it to say that the Marxist thing to do is to develop the productive forces as rapidly as possible. And the only way China could have done that was the way they did it, right? They would be a lot weaker and a lot more susceptible to internal and external attack if they had agreed to, if they wouldn't have these economic reforms, which they have really, really benefited from, trillions in direct investment, access to Western markets, technology transfers. So all these things made it the correct decision for China to, implement these economic reforms, which again, Mao wanted to do in 1949, but couldn't because there was this trade embargo. But yeah, imagine the Soviets and the Chinese strong and united throughout the Cold War and not having been, overridden by Japanese imperialism and the Nazis, to go back to your point, Leo. They would have been tremendously stronger. So we've seen in history, a temporary setback for humanity. We've seen the oligarchs, be lucky and dominate things thanks to this world war that they caused. But yeah, the United States was an unearned position after the war, and they've really exploited that position. And they still maintain a lot of economic power. They're still a very powerful country because the dollar is still world reserve currency. But that's what they're intended on maintaining. They're intended on maintaining this U.S. dominance and also the dollar as the world reserve currency.
We can. Sorry. We have also seen through all of that how serious the capitalists, the owners of for-profit property class, are about maintaining their privilege and their power. How serious and to what extent they would go to, and the capacity for long-term planning when it comes to this. People say capitalists are not capable of long-term planning. It's true. They cannot plan for healthcare. They cannot plan for infrastructure for their people. They cannot plan for any of these things. But when it comes to imperialism, when it comes to taking down any challenger to their system, to their domination, I think we see incredible long-term, meticulous planning. I mean, funding the Ukrainian Nazis since 1946.
Yeah.
Right after the war, the Ukrainian Nazis were funded by the CIA to prepare for a future conflict. They didn't know what shape that conflict would take at that time, but they prepared for it.
Yeah.
So, and the same thing has been happening with China.
One of our, like Taiwan, maintaining Taiwan as a sore spot that they can trigger at any moment to cause problems. One of our viewers, AK, is sharing the long telegram from George Kennan, where he just is very explicit about the goals of the Cold War, which were to, eschewing any ideas of being benevolent or being helpful, and helping people develop and lifting people up. And he was like, we're going to have to deal in straight power concepts because ultimately the Soviet ideology has much more to offer the developing world than our ideology does. So our straight power concepts of, violence, propaganda, and economic war. I mean, that's my paraphrase, but that's essentially what he was explaining in the long telegram when he was describing, the objectives and tactics of the Cold War. So they're good at planning. But the important thing to understand is, in whose interest is the planning taking place? Are they planning to benefit the majority of the people? No. In fact, the plans that they make to benefit the oligarchs and themselves are actually opposite in what is in the interest of the people. And I mean, that's a fundamental truth regarding oppositional class interests. And you got to understand Marxism. You got to understand how capitalism divides society along class lines. And that's why the solution is to, have a party of, by, and for the working class that's in charge of the government and policy making. But
yeah, also important to understand how imperialism and capitalism are two sides of the same coin, right? They enable each other. They make each other possible. If not for the rape, the extraction, the exploitation of the global South, the capitalists within America, within European countries, would not be able to dominate the working class at home with such power. Because when imperialism advances in the global South, the factories are closed at home. The domestic manufacturing is depleted or is gone, is vanished, so the working class becomes increasingly desperate in Germany, in England, in the USA, right? And so when the working class is desperate, they can be controlled and they can be exploited even more. So there's a direct relationship between exploitation of Africa, exploitation of Asia, of South America, and how much power these oligarchs have at home in the USA.
Well, that's true, but the flip side of that is, as it gets worse, and we can see this, as it gets worse for the working class within the capitalist system, the working class begins to push back, and we're beginning to see a resurgence of that pushback in the labor movements, and I think that the biggest hope is the fact that this may be close to the final contradiction of capitalism.
Very optimistic, Patrick. Very optimistic.
Well, it is an optimistic view, but I think you help to defeat yourself if you don't look for the optimistic signs. It's interesting. One of the things, as a really old guy, that's me, has experienced is it's very discouraging to see how people in my own family, for instance, don't understand the history of the working class and their struggles in the capitalist countries, and that's beginning to change. Rather than give up, let's look for those changes and support them.
Absolutely, and I think you're right that this is the last. This is the final. I mean, for real now. I mean, I know people have been saying it for since forever, but just looking at the objective conditions around the world, looking at everything. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but it really looks to me like this is the final showdown. The final.
Yeah, when you talk about, when you even introduce the topic that the United States is looking for war, any kind of war, any kind of attack on China, particularly, and Russia. The mental image I get is of this little poodle yapping at a Great Dane, saying, "Come on, I'm going to take you on. I'm going to take you on." And the Great Dane is saying, I don't really want to spend my energy fighting with freaking poodles, because what is the reality? If you look at China and you look at all the manifestations of strength, how they have taken, just look at the armament situation, the economy of China does not waste its resources on providing outsized profits for the armaments manufacturers, and that is baked in to the capitalist system. So they have, in the last 20, 30 years, taken their excess profits, and they've made. You look at the rail system. How they've made. Who does that benefit? It benefits the people. They can travel around. They can visit their families. It's affordable. It's fast. If you look at that system compared to what we have in the West, it's laughable. It's absolutely laughable, especially in North America. We just don't have those resources for the people because the resources have been been taken by the oligarchs.
Yeah, and the resources flow to those things that are most profitable. So,
right.
The money is going to go where it's profitable. Public transportation isn't a big moneymaker. And the government doesn't want to saddle itself with having to take care of the people, like with having to benefit their lives. Like that's a big headache that they're not interested in and they don't want to deal with. And it doesn't benefit them anyway. That's not what the government is for. And so that's the refrain that you constantly hear from, and they try to indoctrinate this ideology, right? This ideology into people that, hey, we don't like it when the government builds public transportation. We don't like it when the government builds public health care or good public schools. Like we need to do these things privately. And so to the extent that they happen privately, but then that causes a problem, right? So Obamacare was just a law forcing people to go get health care from private companies because they really are ideologically opposed to allowing the government to do anything. But that gets us into that whole, libertarian kind of debate between, perspectives and opinions about how society ought to be run. But I mean, suffice it to say that the government has a place in, its purpose is to improve people's lives and to further the interests of the majority. What is the point of government? What are the point of markets? Like in reality, we're all human beings and we want things to go well. We want things to be improved. And so to think that government isn't about making our lives better, or that, markets, like people's happiness and their needs are supposed to be subordinate to the markets. No. We've got to let the market, the market, humanity serves the market. The market doesn't serve humanity, and it's the same thing with the government. But anyway, we're getting very far afield, maybe. Let me talk about USAID. So Mr. Marco Rubio, little Marco, is kind of publicly asserting that he's going after USAID. And people like us think, great, no more fucking regime change, no more color revolutions. Awesome. Do you think that's what little Marco has in mind? I don't think so. What do you guys think?
Well, I've commented on this before, that for a long time, Democrats played the long game, not just in the USA, but internationally, building a brand. I mean, you talk to people, it was pretty surreal. Like it became very apparent during the Biden years, but you talk to people from Estonia or especially Western Europe. I mean, basically any poodle in that big happy NATO family, they're not just loyal to the USA, they are specifically loyal to the Democratic Party. And they actually don't, that loyalty does not extend it to Republicans and conservatives. They actually tend to hate Republicans and conservatives, to see these people from Europe talk about Trump and Trump supporters. Like they literally hate them like as much as Russians, if not more. And I'll see like on Facebook and stuff, I'll see conservatives like, oh, well, look at this wasteful program, setting up a transgender clinic in, rural Pakistan. They talk about how stupid it is. No, it's not. It's not stupid at all. It's very, very smart because you're sending money to these, and that's the thing too. Yeah, politically motivated, regime change operation. The topic almost doesn't matter. It could be a transgender clinic, it could be an HIV prevention program, it could be a vaccination program, it could be any number of completely legitimate subjects to fund research and public health, but they're politically motivated. What they're meant to do is build loyalty in that country or region to the Democratic Party, not to America, to the Democratic Party specifically. I mean, look at all those. And just to see how powerful it is, when Georgia said, "Okay, you have to register as a foreign agent," they weren't even saying you can't be a foreign agent. You just have to register as a foreign agent. You saw those people rioting in the streets. It shows how effective it is. But if you're a Republican, what does it do for you? I mean, having literally billions of people loyal to the Democratic Party. If you're a Republican, those people are your enemies. It's literally taking money. A lot of people commented about this with Ukraine specifically. U.S. Congress would approve a bill to fund Ukraine, and then Ukraine would buy Bitcoin, and the money would go back to fund the Democratic Party. They were funding their own political opposition. So I don't interpret this as Trump wants to completely get rid of U.S. aid. I think they're going to freeze it and go through everything it's spending their money on with a fine-tooth comb. They're going to fire a lot of people. I think a lot of people are going to get fired. The people being put on administrative leave or told to work remotely is a sign of that. I think it might, and the social media pages all being shut down kind of suggests this is going to be merged into the State Department. What merging it into the State Department does is it puts it under a new boss and it makes it easier to control. It's not going to be this loose deep state appendage flapping around doing its own thing. It's going to be more under the executive branches, because it's going to be more directly under the president's control.
And they've been already unhappy about how overt their money is, because the money trail is easy to find, and so they've been hiding the money trail more. So in the past, they were very public and transparent about all the different programs that they were funding and all the different regime changes they were a part of. And now they're hiding that more. And I think once the USAID goes under the State Department, like you're saying, there will be no more transparency. There will be no more money trail. So I think that's probably the main impetus, one of the main impetus. But also, ending the nonsense cultural transgender things, and because it's kind of a joke, but it's true. Like, we were funding transgender things like in Kazakhstan, right? And so millions of dollars, and I think that's probably the kind of thing that might be on the chopping block. But the actual regime change efforts, I don't think are going to be off the chopping block, and I think they're going to be funded in a far less transparent way.
I would agree with all of that being said. It's probably a reshuffling of methods. I think the situation being what it is, these people are not, complete idiots. They do have eyes. They can see what's going on. But I think there's not an agreement on what path to take in response to the situation of the declining and collapsing empire. So there's a variety of different, pursuing different directions of actions. There's a variety, and it's reshuffling. I think Rubio talking about the multipolar world is, we can see it in many different ways, and probably all of them are valid to a degree. But it just seems to me like a distraction and kind of not virtue signaling, but I mean, because that is the reality. I mean, it would be silly to not acknowledge it. It's so it's so real, right? I mean, you cannot deny it. So he's just saying it to maybe get some people to let their guard down a little bit, to provide camouflage for focused effort for destabilization and war.
Yeah, refocus. And so I think he was off. The U.S. has been off balance, thinking that they could, take over China's sovereignty, take over Russia's sovereignty, get these puppets in power. And I think it's dawning on them that they're not going to do that. We're going to have to deal with, regional powers, multipolarism. So we're going to retrench at home, and then we're going to, strengthen ourselves so we can really be heavy hitters and weaken and defeat these countries, giving ourselves the best chance to do that. And so, there is an acknowledgement that, what we had hoped to accomplish isn't going to be able to accomplish. And there's this further acknowledgement that if we are going to compete and if we are going to be able to contain and weaken, we have to, monopolize and control our own region to a much greater extent, which is like the Fortress America. But I wouldn't say we were giving up on trying to contain China. Like, I don't see people that think we're going to try and work with China as opposed to contain them. I don't know. That's a stretch. But
try looking at it from the point of view of the Chinese leadership, and ask ourselves, who are they? They are all thoroughly educated, and this is important, experienced Marxist-Leninists. So when they look at the United States, what they see is what we've talked about, the end times for capitalism. And are they afraid of the United States? I think that a rational Marxist-Leninist in the leadership in China is afraid of the United States, but not of defeat from the United States. They know that they can be hurt, and their view of governance is not to see, which fighter is standing at the end, but to develop their own society, and that's what they've been getting ahead with. I mean, it's just extraordinary what they've done, and every time that China is confronted with a roadblock, they find a way around it that's beneficial to them, and so I think that that's the stance they're taking. One of the examples that I think is both funny and instructive is China asked to join the International Space Station, and they said no. The West said no. You can't join the International Space Station because in their mind that would advance China. China went ahead and built their own. Most people don't know it, but the United States has never built an International Space Station on their own technology. That was not done by NASA. Now I might be speaking. I can't back up what I'm saying now, but there's just some things I've read that called into question what the actual contribution of American technology was.
No, it's the Soviet space stations uses that modular technology. Yeah.
Sorry?
I was saying the International Space Station is built with that modular platform that was developed by the Soviet Union, and they actually decommissioned their Mir space station early to start the ISS with the United States and Europeans.
Yeah. Well, you're much more knowledgeable than I am about that. But I think it's instructive about China's approach to things meant to set them back. And so far they haven't been set back.
And the ISS is going to be decommissioned in a few years.
Are there currently astronauts trapped? Like, didn't Elon Musk
Yes.
say he was going to rescue them?
2 American astronauts.
Are they still up there? I forgot about that. Are they still up there? Oh my god.
They're still up there.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my god.
They're talking about should Musk try and help get them down. I think China has offered to bring them down, but imagine what a propaganda blow that would be to the U.S. China goes and rescues their astronauts.
So I guess I'll add my 2 cents here. So as of right now, Trump is going after, specifically, he's going after China, Mexico, and Canada. And what's those 3 countries? I mean, there are 3 very different countries, obviously, but what they have in common is that they're major trade partners with the USA, not just major trade partners. They also enjoy very large trade surpluses, as in they export a lot more to the USA than the USA exports back to them. So, we're looking at it from the Chinese perspective.
A brief update on Canada. I just read it last night.
Yes.
So 25% tariff was across the board. It was laid on Canada. And so there was, now it's something odd. I don't even know in my own country who the prime minister is anymore. I'd heard that Trudeau was resigning, but he apparently engaged with Trump. And Trump backed off on the 25% thing on the basis of Canada agreeing to Trump's conditions, which were mostly to implement security measures, which probably mean including Canadians in the whole sort of surveillance thing. So the sincerity of the economic measures is in question, obviously, and Canada is just a small example. We'll see how it plays out in other countries.
Yeah, and I think out of the 3, Canada's the least threatening. Like, I can't think of even one time when someone said, "Oh, we're closing down the factory and firing everybody and moving to Canada." As far as that kind of threat, I don't think that's true because, obviously Canada has, Canadian dollars and, it's economically, as far as what you're paying people and all that is probably pretty similar, if not more than what you're paying Americans. But you hear, so if the idea is we're going to reindustrialize, we're going to move away from being a service economy and move to being industrializing, we're going to use tariffs and the threat of tariffs to push people around, to include China. I don't claim to know how successful that's going to be, but it doesn't necessarily mean, an escalation from what we have now. I mean, we had that in 4 years. We had that in the last 4 years of Trump. He did introduce anti-Chinese sanctions. He introduced anti-Russian sanctions. He introduced a lot of sanctions. He actually broke, it's funny, each successive president breaks records on the number of sanctions, one after the other. So Trump will probably, I'm sure, break his own record on sanctions. He might even break Biden's records, but it doesn't necessarily mean, excuse me, an escalation.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you seem to, think that the United States is willing to coexist with China. Because everybody, even all the liberals, Mearsheimer, Sachs, I mean, they all are clear that, Russia is the small guy that isn't really a peer competitor, and Russia can be either, the hope was we could destroy them and weaken them, But Trump's plan all along was to co-opt them, to get them on our side against China. But the idea is it seems interesting that you totally reject that China is even in the. I mean, so to us, right? Like China is the central thing. Like everything else is being done because of China, and to eventually isolate China, and then to really go after China. But so you just don't even.
I think. Well, I mean, I've said this to you before.
Probably.
The biggest threat to a European country, including the USA, because the USA is, let's be honest, populated by Europeans. The biggest threat to a European country is another European country. Similar countries are more threatening to each other than different countries. So China is a different country. They have a different culture. They're different people. I think the idea is we will just bully them. Like the century of humiliation, the goal was not to destroy China, it was to subordinate China, which succeeded. And I think, and I'm not saying that's a realistic goal and they can repeat that, but I think that's likely what they're hoping for. It's not Lebensraum. It's not where we're just going to annihilate Russians like they never existed. It's we're going to subordinate China. And there is, I think, well, not even I think there's definitely some race theory at play here. If there's another European group and they're your enemies, you just have to destroy them because that's the only way to eliminate them as a competitor. But, those Asians, they're inferior. We can subordinate them. So I do think there's definitely race theory at play here as well.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, because now you sound like you agree with that. And so I'm a little confused about your.
You can bully someone and make them a junior partner without going to war with them. And
well, I mean, maybe you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not talking about war because a war is going to end up in the destruction of the planet. I'm talking about a newly imposed economic trade embargo. I'm talking about violently interdicting shipping lanes with missiles and the military, specifically the Marine Corps, in all the areas that they've ringed these. So that's not all out war. We're not trying to invade China. I never said we would invade China. The 82nd Airborne is going to be, dropped over Shanghai. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about at all. But I am talking about a violently imposed economic war where, we sink their transport ships. So,
well, I mean, an embargo, a blockade is an act of war. I mean, we even saw that with Russia. I mean, they did all these hat tricks.
What's China going to do, though?
Well, they did all these hat tricks, like, we're going to stop issuing insurance to tankers working with Russia. We're doing all these tricks, but we didn't try to interdict. That it was very explicitly the line was very explicitly.
How are we going to make them a junior partner? How are we going to subordinate them if we don't weaken them economically? And how are we going to weaken them economically? So I'm just like, I mean, I enjoy the conversation, Ian, and I don't want to be putting you in a corner and browbeating you. But I mean, I'm curious about what you're saying because there sounds like we agree, kind of, and it sounds like you might misunderstand what I'm saying. But
well, the main thing is so. This whole the stepping stone argument. If you need to get through a country to weaken a different country, then it's not really a stepping stone at all. I do think it's true economically. Russia is self-contained and they could survive without China. I'm not sure as a global power without Russia, China could do the same. Like if you completely cut off everything Russia exports to China, I'm not sure. And it was just the South China Sea, then you could just cut off the South. So I think if they had balkanized Russia, we would be having a different conversation now. They could strangle China, and it would be easy if there was no Russia to talk about. But they can't strangle China, because I think you are, on that point, you're right. Strangling China while Russia is still in play and on China's side isn't really doable. So when you have an impossible statement, you need to if what you're saying is impossible, because right now what we're saying is impossible. We can't economically subordinate China to the extent that we're talking about, then maybe our assumptions are incorrect. So we have to think, what is the goal? What is the goal?
And the recent motion to annex parts of Greenland and take control of the Panama Canal and things like this is probably a decisions made based on the reality that the Ukraine war failed to balkanize Russia, failed to plan A failed, and so this is kind of a plan B or a plan C to shore up regional hegemony, but also cut off potential and growing trade routes that Russia would establish in the Arctic, choke off China's South American connections, or try to at least. So yeah, just to add to what you were saying.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I would not write off the USA as a competitor, as being able to get back into the manufacture. Because I'll tell you, Russia has not made that assumption. No one in Russia has made that assumption that the USA can't come back as a manufacturing power. It's possible, and so they might not even need to weaken Russia if the US, because I mean the USA is the third most populous country in the world. It's very gifted geographically. But
the thing is, all of their industry has been moved overseas since starting in the 70s. All of the industry, all of the know-how, all of the knowing the infrastructure, the supply chain infrastructure. I mean that will take decades to build.
Yeah. I disagree with Ian when he says it's possible that we bring manufacturing back. It's not. Like that's impossible.
You could do it in 4 years. I mean,
it's
doable.
Maybe
let's say
industry, but not for anything to the scope and size that left.
Well, I mean, okay, let's say it is possible if the USA had a proletarian revolution right now, like tomorrow.
Yeah, with China's help, we could
and a people's government, takes control, guillotine all the Musks and all of the Gates and all of these people are sent off to the guillotine. And yes. China cooperates with the new People's Republic of America to reconstruct and to rebuild. Yeah, absolutely possible. In 4 years, in 2.
Well, I mean, we're looking at, consider, when we're talking about China, when we talk about the Soviet Union, we're talking literally from scratch, building industry from scratch. They were, places that didn't even have electricity or indoor plumbing. So the USA to reindustrialize is not starting from scratch. The power grid is there. The urbanization is there. All you have to do is, and I'm not an engineer, so I can't say, I can't make a claim about something.
Sure. Of course, from an engineering point of view, absolutely. From an engineering point of view, from a modernization, base for, industrialization, it exists, absolutely. But, as with everything, as with the reason why the high-speed rail in California will never materialize, as for the same reason, right? For the same reason that, any number of things that are literally, physically, right, possible, but will never materialize because, of course, we have all of these vested interests of these established power structures and ownership regimes, these hierarchies of power and ownership. That controls that country. They will put a stop to any such efforts. These people, the ultra capitalists, they will burn their own country to the ground. They will, genocide their own people before they risk their investment.
People here, we're not skilled, and we require higher wages. And so, whatever manufacturing they move back isn't going to be competitive globally. And so unless we're isolate ourselves, you know, economically and have like what Russia does, you know, we're not. It'll never happen just because we can't compete. Like the wages that the Western workers require to survive are way higher than anybody else, and everybody else has the the manufacturing capacity. They can do it, and they can do it cheaper. So it's just, I mean, to me, it's a kind of a waste of a time because like it's just, I mean, we're not going to move manufacturing back to this country. Maybe in certain industries, maybe we'll move tech, chip manufacturing. How's that going, by the way? Didn't we already try? Weren't we going to open up Arizona as a huge tech manufacturing plant, or what happened? Like, to me, I heard that it didn't work because nobody was skilled and they wanted too much money. And I don't think Arizona's a big tech manufacturing giant, chip manufacturing giant. But this was a couple of years ago, was the big idea to move chip manufacturing. They can't even do it in specific industries, much less all industries. So it's just not going to happen. Nobody's trying to do it anyway. Like,
does anybody remember Build Back Better?
It's advertising. It's literal just Trump advertising, selling himself. This is what we're going to do, working class. Vote for me.
Well,
we're going to bring your jobs back. No, you're not. You don't give a fuck.
We have to consider. Again, that's the goal because that's the goal of tariffs. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to succeed, but I think it's undeniable that that's what they're trying to do. I'm not going to say Trump is like a genius. He's going to pull it all off. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination. I am saying that's what they're trying to do, and I don't think it's even impossible because it is true that the USA does produce a very large number of STEM graduates and has a surplus of STEM graduates. The majority of STEM, I don't think it's almost majority, but it has a very large pool of unemployed STEM graduates. Because why? Because there's just no jobs for them. So they end up working in fast food or some other industry. You're going to tell an engineering student, well, you know what? You can be in, what's that food delivery service? GitHub, I forget what it's called in USA. I've been out of the USA too long. But DoorDash, thank you, DoorDash. I mean, you can keep being a DoorDash driver, or we're opening this new factory and you can work for, let's say, $18 an hour as an engineer at this new plant we're building. So, I mean, it's not a great salary, but you're not a DoorDash driver anymore. I mean, my point is that it can be done. And I know this whole argument for open borders is that, people are unwilling to work. I don't think that's true. I think it's doable to make the U.S. And it's not okay. So here's what I'll say. I'm not saying the USA will become a manufacturing hub again, but it does needs to become a manufacturing hub to survive. If they don't become one, then it will just die. We're in the 21st century.
I think it will just die. I think it will just die.
Well, what I see happening is there's an effort to move U.S. manufacturing out of China, but they're not trying to bring it here, right? So they would like more friendly countries to take the manufacturing from China. So I know we would like India.
Mexico is a friendly country, but he's threatening them with tariffs too. I'll tell you, my town I left, I lived in for 6 years before I moved to Moscow. It's the home of John Deere, the tractor. It's the all-American. That's their whole marketing shtick. We're all American. It's the American agricultural equipment company. Last year, they shut down one of their plants and laid off several thousand. There were actually 4 suicides in my town because they didn't go for the young guys. They went after the people who were who'd been in the company for decades and were close to these guys in their late 40s and 50s. They just laid off. And to move the plant to Mexico, they were going to Mexico with this plant. So I don't think it's even a friendly country like India or Mexico. I think the goal is to keep the manufacturing we have and to try to lure them back. And there's I don't know what the carrot is, because if it's a carrot stick strategy, then I assume there's a carrot, like maybe tax cuts or something, some sort of benefits to working in the USA. But the stick the stick is very obvious. The stick is tariffs. If you want to operate in in Mexico, that's fine, but you'll have to pay 25, 50, 100% tariffs.
Look. All of these things may be true. But if we just look at it again from a systemic and historical point of view, right? Every single imperialist power has depleted their own manufacturing capacity at home, has deindustrialized at home. The British Empire did. The British Empire absolutely gutted their own industrial sector at home starting in the 70s. That's why a certain factory worker lost a finger in his factory and could only play guitar with 3 fingers, and that was the guitarist for Black Sabbath, and heavy metal was born. But anyway,
Tony Iommi?
Yeah, absolutely. He lost a finger in his factory job.
Know.
Yeah. Because the factories were becoming so dilapidated and so inefficient and so run down. But anyway, that was probably right before it closed, and millions of young men were all of a sudden jobless. But anyway, before that, the Portuguese Empire, the same. They deindustrialized at home. At the time, not industrialized, but they gutted their own economy at home, or the domestic, agricultural production and things like this, because their concentration was on the imperial, on the periphery, right? Was on extracting from Africa, from the global south, which was so much more profitable than doing anything at home, doing anything by yourself. So this is just a feature. It's not a flaw. What is the phrase? It's not a flaw. It's a feature.
Yeah.
Right? It's not exactly. It's a feature of imperialism to deplete your own industrial manufacturing economy at home. None of them have reversed it.
Right.
Not the Portuguese, not the Spanish. The Spanish Empire also, their domestic industry, their domestic economy was.
So we were the world's number one manufacturing after World War II. The United States was number one in manufacturing, but eventually, it was just more profitable to send all those jobs overseas. And Absolutely. So without any concern for, the steel workers in Pennsylvania, all around the world, car makers, automakers, steel makers, all these were outsourced. And then what happened to those communities? Those communities collapsed. Detroit. Have you seen a picture of Detroit? It looks like Gaza in some places. So, these are.
I just think your argument is self-defeating. Do we want to crush China, or do we want, because it can't be both? Go ahead.
Hold on. I'm trying to just make a bigger point about how this is how capitalism operates, right? How capitalism doesn't care about anything but profits, how capitalism prioritizes profits over every other consideration. And that's an inhumane and it's an awful system. And, the key is to have a government in place that, balances the interests of the working class and isn't only caring about the interests of, profits for billionaires. But what has happened is, like you said, you had 4 suicides in your town. It's also caused this fentanyl crisis, right? Because all these unemployed, depressed people, are overdosing on fentanyl. And so you see how Trump is exploiting this fentanyl crisis caused by fucking capitalism, right? He's using this real crisis and he wants to use it to attack China, right? Because China, they're saying, is responsible for the precursors that probably CIA-affiliated drug cartels are buying from China, shipping in here with the knowledge of the CIA. CIA isn't trying to stop it. They're facilitating it. I'm sure they're taking a very large cut from the drug trade, but we're using this whole thing that the U.S. is actually doing and causing, and we're blaming it on China, and it's going to be a justification for these tariffs, right? Because that's what Trump said. Until China stops the fentanyl, we're going to do a 10% across-the-board tariff was the last thing I heard. But, if the United States can't stop the so I don't know. She might try and play ball. She might crack down and say, hey, if you are a private company in China that creates these precursors that, the cartels associated with the CIA are used to make fentanyl, you can't sell to them. Which, I mean, how do you stop that? They're just going to sell to somebody else who will sell to them. They'll just have an intermediary or a cutout. But I mean, the whole idea is preposterous that China can stop it, or that it's China's. They're all the fault of the Western government. I mean, from start to finish, from exporting all the jobs, destroying these societies, and then creating a base for rampant drug addiction, and then not giving a fuck about drug addiction, not having a healthcare system that can, teach people, how to make better choices, or an economy that can offer them better opportunities. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, from start to finish, it's the fault of the United States, but they're cynically exploiting these problems that they themselves cause to justify implementing, further aggression against other societies. But anyway,
against China.
One of the features.
Only China. So just one very quick. Not only China, they're also going to use the fentanyl thing to as a justification for possibly launching a war against Mexico.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Go on,
Patrick. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's a good point. I was just going to say that one of the features of capitalism that we talked about in other aspects is that capitalism not only wants the profits, they want them in the third quarter. They don't even plan their capitalist enterprise on a long-term basis, saying, well, no, if we lose our manufacturing, we'll lose this and that. They just look at the benefits of pushing down the working class. If we get rid of the manufacturing, we also get rid of the troublemaker workers. So they're not long-term thinking in terms of the profits that they want to
at the very least, they
absolutely
underestimated the Chinese Communist Party of China. They underestimated the Communist Party of China. They never thought in a million years the Communist Party of China would remain communist, would remain strong, and would not be able to co-opt and really, take over. And that was the planning when Nixon and Kissinger went there. They thought for sure they're going to do these reforms. We're going to infiltrate economically, and then we'll infiltrate politically, like we always and everywhere have. And thank God China said no to that. China has remained strong, and that's why they've earned the enmity of the West.
Yeah, just one more thing about the possibility of the USA reindustrializing and bringing manufacturing at home. Back home, or the impossibility of it. I mean, we see the decisions that are being made right now. We see the decisions being made right now by the Trump administration. And if that were to happen, those would not be the decisions that are being made right now. The decisions that are being made right now are absolutely antithetical to the project of reindustrializing the USA. I mean, he's giving more power to the bubble, or he's blowing the bubbles up. He would have to. I mean, if he was real Napoleon, Bonapartist, he would take reign, like actually control these corporations, actually take full control of the corporations and force them to bring industry home, to reindustrialize, to do all of these things, right? Instead of just like manipulate their fucking stocks value, instead of like just financialization and all of this other bullshit, which doesn't create it doesn't make anything. Like he could, but he's not doing that, and nobody can do that. Nobody can rein in the massive power of the corporate.
It's funny you said that, because in Trump's first 4 years, one of the very first things he did was demand via Twitter. He tweeted a demand that all U.S. corporations leave China immediately. Everybody laughed at him, but he literally tweeted that like in his first month. Anyway, So, yeah, I mean, and that's the problem because the oligarchy is not going to answer to a president. If Trump thinks he can push the oligarchy around, they'll find a new president. It's really that simple.
Yeah, yeah. It comes down to it's a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. That's
Yeah.
what capitalism means. And as long as there's the bourgeoisie are calling the shots, are making all the decisions in a national, international level, I mean, these problems will not get solved.
And they're happy to use Trump as a figurehead and a vessel. And as long as he can sell himself to them and make them stay on board with his agenda, like he'll have success. But the minute he starts opposing their agenda or going against what they want, yeah, he's out of there. And they can wait him out too. They don't have to kill him. They can just wait him out 4 years. But yeah, I think there's just so many things that have to happen in this next 4 years. And I think Trump's on board, right? And I think really going after China in a trade war and eventually an embargo. I'm telling you, that's the whole point of all of this, is to implement an embargo. And how do you implement an embargo without, military and violence? I mean, it's gonna involve utilizing and putting to work all those military bases and installations, all those missile troops, anti-shipping missile troops that we put all over these choke points, all over the Malacca Strait, the South China Sea. It'll be the Panama Canal. And Greenland, if the Arctic opens up for transport, like, we're going to be blocking that too for China. And that's the idea. Go ahead, Patrick.
I've got a question for Zhao. Do you think China can refocus? And I've seen some indication, which you could also address, as to that they may be refocusing their economy somewhat on their internal population, so that the things like we've been discussing, like embargoes, would have less impact on them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's not only a thing that's starting now. I think it started quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
I think the leadership in the PRC has been anticipating sanctions, tariffs, embargoes in the future. And they have been developing, absolutely, domestic consumption is the main driver of, well, I don't know if it's the main driver. Domestic consumption is becoming increasingly important to the Chinese economy, and also exports to not the developed West, but to the global South. I think that has been increasing dramatically. I think the figures are, Chinese exports to Africa and to South America and other parts of Asia is dwarfing what they are exporting to Europe and to the USA. So I think these are all mechanisms that have been put in place, or these are all developments that have been consciously, deliberately went after since 10 years or so. And the real estate bubble was burst deliberately as well. So that's another precaution to make Chinese economy based on high-tech, increasingly on high-tech engineering and manufacturing, developing high-tech products such as AI. So yeah, all of these things I think have been done in the last 10 years in order to anticipate and to safeguard and to protect Chinese economy against
making themselves the world's manufacturer and integrating, being like how many 116 countries. I think China is the main trade partner, the number one trade partner for like 116 countries. That number might be wrong, but there's so many countries that China is the number one trade partner of. And so, just that in itself, makes them impregnable, and it has made them resistant to any kind of economic attack that the West could try. I want to say, I like this. AK has said, number one, that Putin is a real Bonapartist, and I would definitely agree with that. And he says that, like Leo says, Trump is not a real Bonapartist. I agree with that. I want to ask you guys, we talked a little bit about it before the show. What is the difference? So if we consider, China to be led by a government, a communist party of, by, and for the people, what is the difference like? What is the qualitative difference between being a citizen of a government that is of, by, and for the working class, and then in the West being a citizen of a government of, by, and for the oligarchs. Like, you guys want to have any insights into what the difference is like qualitatively?
Well, cheap groceries.
I just look at the things like I mentioned before, like the transportation system. That's an enormous investment, and that principally benefits the working class.
Yeah, so not putting profit before the interests of the people, right? So in the West, if it's not profitable, it's not going to happen, even if the people would benefit. In China, they invest in things that benefit the people, even if they're not the most profitable enterprises. So that's definitely one way.
And look at one of the worst things we have in Canada and the United States, the out of control homeless situation, which I find very painful to see and to walk by, to not have any influence on changing it. I've worked for political parties in Vancouver that their main focus was to address homelessness, and it just keeps getting worse. And in China, there are no homeless. There just aren't, and I'm not saying every citizen of China is ideologically a communist. I don't think they are. I know quite a few people who've moved from China, but I haven't heard any serious criticism. And by the way, that thing about the social credit score is just not a serious criticism. It's just like, if you talk to somebody who lived in China, their response to it is, well, what's that?
Right. Right. I mean, we have a credit score. I have a credit score. I monitor it. There's all kinds of agencies that give me different numbers. The idea that everybody is numbered to given a social credit, it's not true. It's just Western propaganda. One thing that I know is that even though China increased their retirement age, they recently increased it by a couple of years, maybe even a few years. It's still lower than the United States retirement age. And when I last checked, Chinese live longer. So Chinese people are living longer than people in the United States, and they retire earlier than people in the United States. So that's one thing they've got going.
Yeah, let me just add a little something. When you have a proletarian government, when you have a worker state, when you have a state that makes decision in the interests of the vast majority of people who work for a living, the effects are cascading. There's an effect on every aspect of social reality. I mean, the common practice in China is that when you get a package, when you order something from Amazon or the Chinese equivalent of Amazon online, you get a package, right? And it gets delivered to your apartment or your house or whatever, and it's just left in a common area, like you don't have to scan a code, you don't have to sign a paper, you don't have to, you just pick it up. Like literally no one would steal it. No one would take it. It's like literally all over. This is all over China in the relatively poorer cities. I mean, but that's just like one tiny little illustration, like in many cities, people don't have to lock their doors at night, and it's very, very safe. So yeah, that's just one tiny little thing of example of the cascading effects of, a socialist government.
And we can talk about wages tripling every 10 years for 40 years in a row. I mean, that's got to make workers happy.
Yeah, Gini coefficient has been going down. If you look at anyone who's not convinced, just simply Google Gini coefficient China, and you will see that since Xi Jinping took office, it has been going down. So inequality, the rates of inequality have been steadily reducing in the last 10 years.
A lot of China's workforce is unionized. They have one union there, and one could make the case that it's the best and most successful union in the history of the known universe. just by looking at the increase in working conditions and worker pay. Like these
Let me
things have
let
all
me tell you. Let me tell you. Sorry to interrupt. Let me tell you a personal experience. We have. We started teaching English to a family that had moved from China, so we became very close friends with them. And I realized, as they talked about their experiences, that if you're middle class in China, and the Chinese middle class is bigger than the whole Canadian population, and you come to Canada, you're no longer middle class, you're rich. You're fucking rich. You can buy a house like these friends of ours. The husband had a small boutique, and the wife is traveling back and forth from China. She's retiring at the age of 60, and they bought a house for $1.6 million, and just yeah, fine. And in China, they own 4 houses. So and the whole knock against being a citizen of a communist country is, oh yeah, you can't own anything anymore. It's almost like, no, you can't own a car, you can't own your own clothes. The highest rate of home ownership in the world is China.
Yeah, what you cannot own is for profit. I mean, you can, but what is severely limited is for profit property, right?
Yeah.
Is private property.
Yeah,
So
I would
when
imagine
you limit,
those houses, one is owned by the son, one is owned by the parents, one is owned by the brother or sister. I'm guessing because they want you to live in the houses. They don't want you to rent them out for profit, and that's discouraged.
Right.
But people do get around that, and people figure out ways how to get around that and to secretly on the down low, rent out properties. It happens, but it's not encouraged, and it definitely doesn't exist in the open like it does in the West.
Yeah.
So
one of the results of that is that more people own their own homes for living. Anyway, go on.
Yeah.
And they're not as expensive. And then people, you look at what people pay for their homes as a percentage of their wages, and it's so minuscule. Whereas in the United States, it's 30, 40% of our wages go towards housing. And so, that's
in all of the Soviet Union, in all of the former Soviet bloc, average cost of rent was 5% of wages.
5%, yeah.
And, might I just add something? This is more controversial probably to all of your listeners. Russia is rapidly, from everything that I see from, not being there, rapidly kind of going towards some of the same directions that China has been going in terms of socializing, in terms of collectivizing, in terms of better infrastructure for people and all of these things. But anyway.
Well,
and China is also under Xi taking serious steps to combat corruption, which they've admitted is a problem. There's a lot of temptation there, amongst large capitalists to cheat on the system. If they get caught now, they'll be sorry.
So that's a great point. Xi has made an anti-corruption campaign. He started that like in 2013, and it continues. But the West loves corruption because the West can manipulate and leverage corrupt officials for its own purposes, and so it's part of national security. Just getting the corrupt government under control is part of a national security drive too. I just watched like a 2.5 hour long Frontline. Was it Frontline? It was like a hit piece on Xi. It's like, who is this Xi dictator? Who is this evil guy that, we have to hate? And it was really just 2.5 hours long from his very beginnings. And it talked about Tiananmen Square. It just pushed that hoax. And it talked about the Uyghur genocide. Man, it was just so awful. But that's the kind of thing that passes for, Western journalism. And it was so interesting. But in reality, what they never told? They never told that the CIA has declassified. WikiLeaks has declassified a cable about Xi Jinping saying that he's just a really good, honest person, and he's legitimately. I mean, that was the CIA's real, actual analysis of him. That he's not corruptible. He is true and honest. And you think they talked about that on this Frontline documentary? They did not. Ian, Leo made some assertions about Russia, but you're right there on the ground in Moscow. What do you think about all of our China praising? I know you don't like it, Ian. It's okay.
I'm not pro China, but I'm also not anti China. I'm just I think what Leo said. I don't know if it's exactly true, but I would say it's because, I mean, capitalism is, the capitalist genie is out of the bottle, the toothpaste is out of the tube, as the saying goes. So Russia is a capitalist country now. It is true that certain critical industries were nationalized, were either completely nationalized or at least partially nationalized, and that is the case with the military-industrial complex, with agriculture, which I think is not 100% nationalized, but it's close to 100. Well, it's not 100% because there's, of course, private farms, but a lot of it is nationalized, and the same with the energy sector. And I think that the model that a lot of countries are moving forward going to apply to themselves, because if you have a privatized marketplace, what happens is foreigners buy all of your critical infrastructure, and it's not beneficial for a sovereign country for investors from some country besides your own to own your infrastructure and to control your food and your industry. It's not a good thing. So I don't think there's necessarily going to be a wave of countries becoming communist, but I think nationalization, or at least partial nationalization, is going to happen. And you see how upset the usual suspects get when a country nationalizes its industry, because how are we supposed to buy and scrap? How are vulture capitalists supposed to buy all of your crap and sell it for pennies and dollars? How are we supposed to do that?
The quickest way to get the dictator label. You nationalize, you're a dictator, of course.
Yes. So, but I do think that's the route, and so when there's, as you see that when there's some big scandal in Russia, nationalization is very often the response to it. Like if a coal mining company has a major accident, like one that happened a few years ago, they usually are very heavily penalized, and very often what happens is there's a push to nationalize that sector of the economy. So, and it is true, there's more workplace safety in state-controlled enterprises than in private enterprises, and that's true worldwide. So, we're going to say.
Sounds like they're a lot like China. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Let's wrap up, guys. I know everybody has to get going, but I really appreciate this, guys. Any last thoughts before we sign off? I'll take that as a no. Thank you very much. Leo, Patrick, Ian, we will see you guys soon. Ian, I hope to see you on Friday. And thank the viewers and all the commenters. Thank you, viewers and commenters. So we will see you soon.